In this study, I will be analyzing the portrayal of race, ethnic, and class relations in urban America in the films Do the Right Thing by writer-director Spike Lee and Sorry to Bother You by writer-director Boots Riley through a Marxist reading of screenplay and production portrayal of class and cinematic juxtaposition. The two films take place in outer ring, multiracial, and ethnically diverse neighborhoods. Both show the different issues of urban America, but at different times. Both their plots revolve around working-class black men whose main conflicts arise out of a need for employment and money in similar dire circumstances. Do the Right Thing is set in the hottest day of the summer in late 1980s Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, in an era of plagued American inner cities, white flight, and rising racial tensions. It follows Mookie, the local pizza delivery boy who aims to keep cool and get paid, being pulled by everybody on the block to do what they'd like him to do, but ultimately he needs to do the right thing. When a friend of his is killed by a policeman outside of the pizzeria where he works, he chooses what he thinks is right and starts a riot in front of his racist boss and the owner of the pizzeria, Sal. Drawing directly from instances of police brutality and racial violence that had been occurring in New York and the US for decades. With race being inextricably related to and as important as class in America, it is important to note that racial analysis through Marxist theory is equivalent to class in the context of the film. Sorry to Bother You is set in Oakland, California, the historically black sister city of San Francisco in the 2010s, a time plagued with rising disparities between rich and poor, white and BIPOC, and gentrification. Centering around Cassius Green, a down-on-his-luck 20-something who pursues of purpose and material wealth, finding it in his extraordinary ability as a telemarketer. When he rises the ranks of Regal View, he must decide between the betterment of his own material condition or those of the workers of his telemarketing firm and contracted workers of Worry Free. This all-inclusive manufacturing company aims to humanize its workers in the name of profit. These films can be examined through a Marxist theory, popularized in the 19th century by political philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, with its application in film dating back to the 1920s, when Soviet filmmakers and scholars like Sergei Eisenstein and Alexander Dovzhenko, as well as the so-called Frankfurt School, a collection of left-wing philosophers and scholars at the University of Frankfurt in the 1930s, contributed elements like Soviet montage, an editing technique that applied Marx's idea of dialectics of filmmaking, and close or symptomatic reading, and critical theory. Elements that examine film through narrative and plot devices, technique, and production. With this information, this study will examine the film's portrayal of class through the use of color. Both films use color to illustrate class in a different way. Do the Right Thing chooses to use bright and saturated colors to represent heat. All the characters are hot, and the film illustrates this constantly with shots with sweat droplets and even having heat effects caused by heat lamps placed in front of the camera. But what Lee leaves out is why are they so hot? This can be deduced by using the instrument of symptomatic reading. Mainly, the characters are hot because they are poor. Most cannot afford air conditioning, and their houses and apartments are not made well for the heat. The state and city of New York have no laws for landlords about air conditioning in the summertime as they do for heat in the winter. They are hot because of state violence. Outside, there's no place to cool. When some of the boys open a fire hydrant for cold water, they are immediately stopped by a white man who calls the police on them for just wanting to cool down. The same police who later killed Raheem. So they are hot because they are not white. This is why the use of color in the film signifies class. Unlike Do the Right Thing, symptomatic use of color, Sorry to Bother You uses color to explicitly separate class by type and vibrancy. The vivid blue and turquoise at the caller's office are entirely different from the manager's office's bright yellow. This also shows the racial disparity at Regal View, the fictional company where Cassius works, where the unqualified, weirdo, debaucherous white managers have no idea what they're doing, as the overqualified, hardworking, non-white collars sit in their cubicles trying to keep their jobs. The dim grays and whites of the power collar's office represent difference in both class and place, with the absence of color representing status and the less dynamic color representing the idealized whiteness that Cassius exhibits. When Cassius has his comeuppance, the lighting of his room changes from yellow to white, and he wakes up unconsciously doing the white voice. In this setting, he is white. When he is later in Stephen Lift's house, he is no longer white, as there is an absence of color, but it is darker than anything else. This can also be seen in the way people view him, as a hardened black man with a rough gangster past, a stereotype often found amongst upper-class white people about working-class black people. When he encounters the Equisapiens, they are seen with bright green doors, separating them from the rest of humanity, with some revealed to be black from Oakland, like Cassius. The bright green found at Stephen Lift's utilities compound similar to the bright blue and yellow Regal View color scheme signifies the workers, with the muted reserved colors of the rich differentiating the two. One of Marx's signature tool in defining his theories is dialectics, specifically dialectical materialism. In Marx and Engels, a contribution to the critique of political economy, history summarizes an evolution between the forces of production, resources, tools, workers, and skills, and the relations of production through violent events that guide one to the next. For example, take the Roman mode of relations and productions of plebeian and patrician, or in capitalism, the capitalist bourgeoisie class and the worker proletariat class. As the first Marxist socialist state, the filmmakers of the early USSR used Marxist ideology and came up with dialectic editing, or montage editing, where the effect of one shot highly influences the one before and the one after. Mookie is calling his girlfriend Sal. Sal, his boss, is the one exploiting the labor. Mookie is using the phone to call his girlfriend. Sal, his boss, sees this in the next shot and tells him to get back to work. Mookie is angry in the next shot and says he'll get off in a second. Sal yells at him again. Then Mookie chooses to bow down to the bourgeoisie non-violently instead of overcoming him and staying on the phone. And in Sorry to Bother You, in an unordinary shot montage sequence, Cassius sells the slave labor to the CEO, selling out the proletariat for monetary gain. The bourgeoisie rewards him with payments, and his material conditions improve, but his ideal conditions remain the same or decline. Marx and Engels put forth dialectical idealism in opposition to materialism, the two being the opposing views of reality over the course of human history, the material and the ideal. Material reality is everything that exists around us, food, people, plants, buildings, objects, whereas ideal reality is everything that humans imagine it to be, any ideas they have about reality, and any goals that are not yet there in the present. This idea of ideal reality is used extensively in Sorry to Bother You with Cassius's main narrative device, the one that allows him to go through his hero arc, being his ability to sell ideal reality through capitalism and consumerism. In the movie, this is represented by the white voice, the voice of an idealistic white man who can sell customers of Regal View much more than a single product, but the idea of security. This ideal reality of capitalism in the film uses the technique of the overdubbed stereotypically white actor's voice over those of black actors, and contrasts this with the often very plain-looking, depressing settings, undynamic shots, and lack of camera movement in the material world. This device propels Cassius to the top, but towards the climax of the movie, Cassius realizes that the ideal is clashing with the material reality of his fellow workers, as his idealism has not even upheld the material conditions of his fellow workers, as Marx dictates. Dialectics can also take the shape of conflicting cinematic ideas, not just Marxist ones. This can be achieved through the use of cinematic juxtaposition, or by putting conflicting subjects into the same line of cinema. Spike Lee is a master of this, and does it throughout Do the Right Thing. At the very beginning, when Rosie Perez dances to Public Enemy's Fight the Power, the angry male voices and chopped up sync samples of rap songs contrasted with the jazzy fluidity of the film's added sax track. Rosie Perez's meticulously put together advertisement-like clothing, put against the harsh, blighted urban background, tight spandex attire juxtaposed to the revealing yet more breathable boxing attire Perez wears, pitting sexuality and power or fierceness. Smiley pitting the revolutionary Muslim Malcolm X, represented by the large X, against the non-violent Christian Martin Luther King, represented by Jean-Michel Basquiat's signature coronary design. In a power-filled low-angle shot, putting together again the Marxist forces of shifting material history and Hegel's ideal history. Or later in the film, when a similar dialectic is created using Radio Raheem's love and hate rings, and Raheem reciting his Night of the Hunter inspired speech. This dialectic is the one that drives the plot forward, with the events at the end of the film being processed by Radio Raheem's death and Mookie yelling hate, choosing the material over the ideal, and taking up violence to challenge his oppressors. Another ideal crucial to Marxist philosophy is that of the superstructure, the structure which is above both the ruling and lower classes, but aims to maintain order, such as laws, religion, politics, mass media, and education. Superstructures like Hollywood and the American studio system, something Herbert Marcuse and members of the Frankfurt School expanded upon with their idea of the culture industry, or how the bourgeoisie emanates their ideas on the working class through cultural artifacts like films. In most cases in history, both the studios and production teams of films have been dominated by white people. These two films flip the script, both having primarily black people involved and being independent of the studio system. This works and Do the Right Thing's favors, giving a black and ethnically diverse story the lens of reality and creativity that had not been portrayed in many films previously. Spike Lee refused to tell a depressing and aggressive story about an inner city community and a young black man through grit and violence, as he believed that many films had already done that. He instead aimed to portray a scenario where tensions were high, terrible decisions were made, and hate almost takes over, using real and positive human emotions in all the characters, not just the black or the white. This is represented in camera angles, movement, and saturation. There are many instances throughout the film where characters come into conflict with one another, signified by the saturated, wide-angle, canted shots that are instantly recognizable only to the film, and owe a great deal of their creation to the creative freedom and grounding of the production crew. Like the scene with a typical white gentrifier on a bike, Larry Birdshirt, who bought a brownstone and was
born in Brooklyn.
The production structure of Do the Right Thing also allowed producers to better shoot black skin tones, an aspect of the film that was universally praised. Hollywood didn't focus on methods of shooting non-white skin at the time, with issues stemming from the grading of Technicolor all the way back in the 1930s. The producers and photographers, such as cinematographer Ernest Dickerson along with Lee, decided to use the unorthodox method of brightly lighting sets in the streets using high saturation, lens filtration, newly correctly graded film stock, strategic planned color palettes for different locations, and the element of heat, all portraying black skin tones in a new way to cinemagoers. This kind of representation not being replicated again until the advent of digital technology and more readily available film stock with good color grading. Both films use the breaking the fourth wall to break the superstructure of serious narrative genre or any other traditional style of making socially aware and socially critical films. In Do the Right Thing, the fourth wall breaks in the insult scene as the characters of the film go one by one looking directly into the camera and adversely at the audience and hurl a number of slurs, insults, and ethnic digs at another character. All of this is meant to illustrate that the hate these characters feel is superficial, and the hate that society feels is superficial as well, arguably telling the audience that what divides us is not race but our conditions, and that sometimes a few windows are broken as a result. Sorry to Bother You breaks the fourth wall with its use of fantastical elements contrasting the mundanity and depressing material condition of the film. The white voice, the equisapien, Stephen Lift's entire presence, and principally the use of parody media to show the culture industry and how it functions as a superstructure in our society. The parody game show I Just Got the Shit Kicked Out of Me on TV, Worry-Free Cribs, and stop motion animation all go to insane lengths of detail, recreating every single shot, lighting, sound, and editing effect of their real-life equivalent and mocking the premises to show how the media hides exploitation through the breaking of mundanity and the usual perspective narrative of Cassius and causing comedic effect for the audience. The superstructure of the media is further shown through its unwarranted ability to co-opt and devaluate any social progress into a brand, mostly through the black eye protest depiction on the news reports on the strike undermining and deliberately misinterpreting their meaning, and what serves as a catalyst of the final third of the film, the catchphrase girls rise to online and mainstream virality, turning what was a measure of semi-violent protest against exploitation becoming a funny meme. But Sorry to Bother You and Do the Right Thing offer two very different lenses to view race and ethnicity and class relations in modern American urban environments. Their cinematic techniques, juxtaposition, screenwriting styles, and portrayals of class through film elements also massively contribute to the art of film as a whole and offer a great case study in both these theories. Both films tell us about how going with hate is inevitable and that all we hate is not what we think it is.